The first foundation of democracy is the worth of the individual, meaning that all people are valued and viewed as an important part of society. In March of 2011, in Syria, anti-government protests began as part of the Arab Spring. These protests escalated into a violent civil war, causing millions of Syrians to flee their homes in search of peace and safety. The majority of these refugees have escaped to Lebanon, Jordan, northern Iraq, and Turkey. These countries have taken in on average 969,500 refugees. Comparatively, the United States, one of the richest and most powerful countries in the world, has taken in only 1,500 refugees. Research shows that 53% of Americans do not want to accept any Syrian refugees at all. Many Americans believe that since the refugees are not American citizens, we do not have a responsibility to help them. This is an example of the United States ignoring the idea of the worth of the individual because we fail to see the value of the lives of citizens other than our own, including these refugees. The second foundation of democracy is the equality of all persons, meaning everyone is treated with respect and is seen as equal under the law. Same-sex relationships have been around since the beginning of civilization. However, for the vast majority of history, relationships of this type were not tolerated. This intolerance of same-sex couples was reinforced in the United States when, in 1996, President Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, banning the federal government from acknowledging same-sex marriages. Many states began individual debates over legalizing same-sex marriage within their jurisdiction. In 2013, the United States Supreme Court overturned the Defense of Marriage Act, citing the 14th Amendment, which addresses citizenship rights and equal protection under the law. On June 26 of 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states, overturning several states' laws banning homosexual marriage. This is an example of the United States following the idea of the equality of all persons, because this ruling granted equal rights to homosexual couples as heterosexual couples. The third foundation of democracy is majority rule versus minority rights, meaning that the government believes that what the majority chooses is most likely going to be the best course of action, as long as it does not infringe on the minority's rights. For years, the United States government has taken rights away from the Native American population. The government took away the Native Americans' land, right to religious freedom, and right to equal opportunity. In order to be free to practice their religion and traditions, many Native Americans live in poverty on reservations. Despite statistics such as 80% unemployment rate, 60% of their housing being infected with black mold, 90% of families being affected by alcoholism, and the rate of diabetes being 800% higher than the national average due to the sugar-rich foods provided by the Federal Commodity Food Program, the government still fails to help. However, in September of 2007, the United Nations adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Despite the United States' vote against this declaration, it passed. Although this declaration is supposed to strengthen the civil rights of all Native peoples, the United States continues to ignore the issues of discrimination against the Native Americans. This is an example of the United States ignoring the idea of majority rule without infringing on the minorities' rights, because although the majority of the United States citizens do not see discrimination against Native Americans as a problem, and therefore continue to ignore the issue, the Native Americans' rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as they are outlined in the Declaration of Independence, are taken away. The fourth foundation of democracy is the necessity of compromise, meaning that the government must recognize that compromise may be required in order to achieve their goals. The United States government has a history of not getting along. The two major parties in the United States, Democrats and Republicans, often disagree on important issues. These disagreements are often resolved, but can also lead to government shutdowns. There have been a total of 18 separate government shutdowns since 1976, lasting anywhere from 1 day to 21 days. In 2013, the federal government experienced its third longest shutdown. The Senate refused to pass a bill with measures to delay the Affordable Care Act, and because the two legislative houses did not come up with a compromise bill by their deadline, the government lacked appropriate funds at the beginning of a new fiscal year. This caused the government to shut down. Because of this, over 800,000 government employees couldn't work. Government processes such as processing a passport, gun license, or trade license stopped, and the economy was cost about $3 billion. This is an example of the United States government ignoring the necessity of compromise, because this shutdown occurred due to the legislative house's failure to come to an agreement. The fifth foundation of democracy is individual freedom, meaning each person is free to do what they want unless their actions interfere with the rights and liberties of others. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution states that Congress can make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Several court cases since the passing of this amendment have clarified this right. For instance, Cohen v. California, which allowed the use of certain offensive words and phrases to convey political messages, and Schenck v. United States, which stated that this right does not allow citizens to incite actions that would harm others, such as yelling fire in a crowded building without there being a fire. Presidential candidate Donald Trump has pushed the boundaries of this right throughout his campaign. Trump has spoken out against Mexicans, women, and Muslims. However, he defends these statements by declaring war on political correctness. Trump has stated that the problem is not what he is saying, but an intolerant society of overly sensitive liberals who violate his freedom of speech. This is an example of the government following the ideas of individual freedom because, although Trump's statements may be in bad taste, he is allowed to continue saying them due to his freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution.